Welcome to this explainer. We use money every single day, right? It's in our pockets, it's on our phones, and it governs almost every aspect of modern society. But to truly grasp what it is, we have to look back at the friction that forced us to invent it in the first place. So let's strip away the banks, the plastic cards, and the digital wallets, and imagine a world long before any of that even existed. Okay, let's start with the classic friction of the ancient world, barter. Imagine you've got a basket of apples, but what you really need is a pair of shoes. You go to the shoemaker, offer up your apples, and he just says, "No thanks, I want a chicken." Well, now you're completely stuck. Trading physical items directly wasn't just slow, it brought early economies to an absolute standstill. Economists actually call this massive headache the double coincidence of wants. You had to spend forever finding the exact right person to trade with. Plus, the math was just impossible. I mean, how many apples equals one warm blanket? In a small village, you could kind of work it out with your neighbors, but as those villages grew into sprawling cities full of complete strangers, that friction became impossible to manage. So, humanity desperately needed a bridge. We needed something small, durable, and most importantly, universally desired to connect strangers. You couldn't exactly drag a cow across town every time you wanted to buy a loaf of bread, and apples just rot in a few weeks. The growing world desperately needed a better tool for economic connection. And that brings us to commodity money. We constantly upgraded this technology over thousands of years, migrating toward real physical things that absolutely everyone wanted. Near the oceans, societies used these beautiful, strong cowrie shells. Up in colder climates, they relied on thick animal furs. Over time, it became incredibly clear that rare, durable items made the best money, leading us to transition from shells to salt to heavy lumps of precious metals, and eventually to coins. Oh, and as a quick aside about salt, today it's super cheap and just sits on every dinner table. But a long time ago, it was literally like gold. It was absolutely vital for keeping meat fresh before refrigerators existed. Because everyone needed it to survive, everyone accepted it as payment. In fact, Roman soldiers were actually paid in salt. They called it their salarium, which is exactly where we get the modern word salary that we still use today. But here's the thing. Commodity money had some fatal flaws. Imagine getting paid your monthly salary in salt, getting caught in a sudden rainstorm, and watching your wealth literally melt into the mud. No thanks, shells can crack, and weighing lumps of silver on a physical scale for every single purchase was agonizingly slow. Worse, it was way too easy for bad actors to cheat by melting down the gold and mixing in cheap base metals. This limitation forced our next major upgrade. About 2,700 years ago in Lydia, which is in modern-day Turkey, clever traders and rulers started standardizing metal into specific pre-measured weights. They stamped them with a fierce image, usually a lion or a bull, and by doing this, they invented the very first coins. It fundamentally changed how humans interacted with value, because suddenly you didn't need a scale or any expertise in metal, you just had to trust the king's stamp. That stamp was an ironclad promise of purity and weight, meaning the hard work of verifying the money was already done by the state. This massive leap in trust created a universal language of value. It allowed empires like Rome to build thriving global markets, where a soldier in London and a merchant in Egypt could seamlessly trade using the exact same coins. But of course, this wild success created a brand new logistical nightmare. As global trade boomed, carrying mountains of heavy gold and iron coins became incredibly dangerous. It was exhausting for merchants to haul literal tons of metal just to buy bulk goods. They needed heavy carts just to move their cash, which made them painfully slow and massive targets for highway robbers. This solution? It actually came from ancient China over 1,000 years ago. Busy merchants trading silk and tea started leaving their heavy iron coins with a trusted vault, taking a lightweight paper receipt in return. This was a leap in abstract trust that absolutely shocked European travelers centuries later. When Marco Polo witnessed this, he couldn't believe his eyes, exclaiming that the emperor could practically make money out of tree bark. Because to Europeans at the time, paper was just paper. It had no real value. But slowly, the sheer genius and efficiency of this idea spread like wildfire. Paper was infinitely lighter, and because it represented real gold sitting safely in a highly guarded vault, you could literally send a fortune across the sea in a simple envelope. By the 1600s, European banks began issuing these literally named banknotes. Instead of trading heavy, cumbersome metal, people simply started trading the promises of metal. Okay, let's dive into how banks quickly evolved from simple vaults into the driving engines of the global economy. Bankers realized that a huge portion of the gold just sat there, untouched, for years, so they began lending it out. A young farmer could borrow that sitting money to buy a tractor, grow significantly more food, make a larger profit, and then pay the bank back with a little extra called interest. The money starts working, the economy accelerates, and wealth is generated for everyone involved. However, this whole system was built on a really fragile foundation of trust. If a bank over-leveraged by lending out too much money and rumors spread that the vault was empty, well, you got a bank run. It's a catastrophic panic where everyone demands their gold back at exactly the same time. These devastating panics happened so frequently throughout history that governments eventually had to step in and create central banks to backstop the system and guard against these economic wildfires. For centuries, we managed this risk using the gold standard, tightly linking our paper money to rare physical metal. This conservative approach kept prices very stable, for sure, but it placed a hard ceiling on economic growth. A nation literally couldn't print more money unless it physically dug more gold out of the ground. During unprecedented crises like World War I and the Great Depression, governments desperately needed financial flexibility to save their economies, which the rigid gold standard simply did not allow. So slowly, the world began cutting its tethers to physical gold. By 1971, the U.S. completely broke the dollar's link to gold, plunging us into the era of fiat money. Now, fiat is a Latin word meaning "let it be done." It sounds a bit like magic, but fiat money is simply a massive interconnected social contract. It has value because the government declares it does, and entirely because we collectively trust it. Central banks now manage the money supply, trading the stability of gold for the flexibility to actually engineer economic solutions. And just as heavy metal gave way to paper, paper is now dissolving right into the digital ether. Over the last 50 years, credit cards and the internet have turned our wealth into a ledger of ones and zeros, moving instantaneously around the globe. When you get paid today, no physical object trades hands, right? A digital signal fires off, a database updates, and a number on your screen just magically goes up. Which brings us to our most radical shift yet, cryptocurrency. Innovations like Bitcoin use a technology called blockchain. It basically acts like a massive digital book that everyone in the network can verify, but absolutely no one can cheat. For the first time in human history, this creates trust without needing a central bank, a government, or a king to act as a referee. We are literally experimenting with trusting math and code instead of guarded vaults. But wait, this incredible, frictionless convenience comes with a pretty profound catch. As we move entirely into the cloud and physical, untraceable cash starts to disappear completely, it forces us to ask some really serious questions. If every single cent you spend is permanently tracked by a computer on a digital ledger, what does that mean for your privacy? What does it actually mean for your freedom in a completely digital world? We've journeyed all the way from trading apples for blankets, through cowrie shells and Roman salt to gold coins, paper receipts, and now invisible digital code. Through every single massive leap, money has ultimately just been a human story about connection, perceived value, and most importantly, trust. So I leave you with this to chew on. What strange, unimaginable new technology will represent our value a century from today? Will future generations look back at our plastic cards exactly like we look back at seashells? Thank you for exploring this with me today. Keep wondering.